Hi, and welcome to Master Your Fishing. I'm Thornton, and you join me today at Whitmore Fishery in the northwest, where I'll be looking at the most successful methods and tactics to turn you into a fishing master. In episode 1, we'll be concentrating on 4 different areas of the peg to turn an average day into a successful day. So join me in just a sec. For this session, you join me on a typical canal-style commercial, where as you can see, all the gear's ready to go, so let's master the peg. So as I mentioned, I'm going to fish different areas of the peg. I'm going to show you the 3 areas and 4 rigs to master your fishing. To begin with, I'm going to start to the far bank. The reason being, as we're tackling up, the disturbance on the bank will make fish push over there, and that's where we want to start. As the session progresses, we're going to come down the middle, where we're going to fish 2 rigs. One shallow and one on the bottom in about 4 or 5 foot of water to catch all species of fish in the peg with maggots. And then at the end of the session, we're moving down the edge to take advantage of the feeding spell from the carp as evening approaches. I've plumbed up to a depth of 3 foot. 3 foot's a good starting depth. It allows me to sort of, it's shallow enough to not get liners initially, but it also allows me the flexibility to deepen up if I'm not getting the response that I require. I've chosen pellets as my starting bait. Pellets is an instant bait that if there's any feeding fish in the area, I'll catch them straight away. Coming down to the business end, you'll see there I've hooked the band. I prefer to hook the band because it allows me to put pellets on this rig, but if I need to fish another bait, I don't have to change the hook length. I can just slip the band straight off. The hook itself is a KM4 size 16. I've coupled that to an 016 hook length. The shotting pattern is quite simply 3 number 8 slot shot spread over the bottom third of the rig, and that allows me to catch fish on the drop because I'm going to be loose feeding pellets with a catapult. The main line itself is 018. It might seem a bit heavy for many of you, but I'm a huge fan of fishing with heavier line. It's stiffer, so provides, in my opinion, better presentation, and it's also slower fall through the water than what a lower diameter would give you, simply due to the surface area of the line. Moving up to the float, I've chosen a Middy Styrex 3 4x12. 4x12 is a perfect size for 3 foot of water. Any shallower, I'd actually increase the size of the float, and any deeper, you'd look to increase the size of the float. But 3 foot, 4x12 is perfect. It's got a bristle to allow me to read the shots down and ultimately the pellet as it touches bottom. And above that, I've got a good foot of line, so I can increase the depth slightly if I need to go deeper, but also allows the presentation in the wind to keep the float still. And that's finished off with a Middy pink elastic, hollow, which will allow me to catch silverfish as well as the expected bonus carp. So that's the far bank rig. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to feed between sort of 5 and 6 pellets twice, 6mm hard pellets towards the far bank, and present a hard 6mm pellet on the hook. And that will hopefully catch me some resident carp to begin with. I'm going to start in about 3 foot of water. The reason being that's a good sort of depth to start with carp. They generally live in that sort of like area, but it also gives me scope to increase the depth if they're not coming into that shallow water, and likewise go into shallower water if I'm experiencing line bites. We just hooked into one then. It's important when you've hooked one just to put a few pellets into the peg. Don't know what this is going to be actually. First fish. There we go, small F1. That represents perfectly the choice of pellets. We've just started the session, we're a couple of minutes in and we're already into decent sized fish. The next rig we'll look at is down the middle. Starting at the business end, we've got a size 16, 63-13 hook. We're fishing maggots down the middle today due to the fact that there's silvers present as well as the standard carp, and that hook will handle both the silverfish and any bonus fish that we might hook. That's to a 6-inch 012 hook length with 3 number 10 slot shot to a bulk of number 8s. Main line is 018 for exactly the same reasons as the far bank rig, and that moves up to a size 4x14 carp grey series 1. That's a perfect size float for that depth of water, which is about 5 foot. We've got 2 number 8 back shots to stabilise the rig in the water, and a yellow hollow, which is a 6 to 10 rating. That's for the silverfish and any expected bigger carp that we might hook. The next rig we'll go for is the shallow rig, which is going to be fished on exactly the same line as the deck rig, but obviously up in the water. Now, I know there's ide present in this fishery, so this rig reflects that. I've got a size 63-13 hook, which is a 16, 010 hook length, and 3 number 10 slot shots. And that's coupled with a Styrex 1 4x10. A light float, fished on the drop with a light hook length for the silverfish that we're trying to catch. We've got 018 main line again, and that's finished off with a 6 to 8 solid elastic. That's a nice soft elastic which will allow me to guide the ide out of the peg with minimum disturbance. So we've caught a fish across with the pellets, so now we're going to drop down the middle and see what's happened. We fed it with a big pot to begin with, and I've been loose feeding it by hand ever since. So then it's a case of working out how the fish want to feed on the day. I could have ide either on the bottom, barbel on the bottom, or they could be right up in the water, and that's why this line has 2 different rigs to cover those different options. If it was catching on the bottom, I'd more err on the side of using a big pot or a pole mounted pot to concentrate the bait in a tight area and get it down in one go. These are the big pots that I choose to use. It's the Middy click cup. Very simple and very quick. That's the top kit with the attachment on the end. That's the cup, and it's as quick as that. You're ready to go. Now with the big pot in, with maggots, I'll be looking to feed around that many into the pot, and that's to congregate the fish onto the bottom where they'll be easier to catch. Now the other 2 choices of feeding is out of the hand or with a catapult. At that distance, I'd always prefer to feed out of the hand, just because it allows me to fish other lines, but also regularly feed, which is very important to catch the fish. We've all heard the old adage, little and often, and it's never as important as when fishing with maggots. Just small amounts while you're fishing will keep that line being fed and the fish feeding. The catapult comes into place if it's very windy or I'm struggling to feed out of the hand. This is the Middy X-Flex catapult. It's the one I choose. It's got a perfect pouch for keeping the bait tight. As you can see, it's quite conical, and as the bait comes out of the catapult, it keeps it in a nice tight group, which is important to catch the fish. It's got the right size elastic for me to be able to feed accurately down the middle. Check these out, they will help you out. The last way that we can feed over this maggot line is with a pole pot that's mounted on the end of the pole. I use the Middy Grip Flex. They're so easy to position right at the very end, and that's very important for catching fish because it allows you to easily feed straight over the top of the pole float without having to lean forward if the pole pot was mounted further back. You simply press the base, which opens up the bottom, and it slips straight into position as quickly as that. In terms of quantities, you're going to be feeding quite a few maggots, and this sort of size pot, I'd probably look to fill it to the brim. Let's see if we can get one. That was an I'd caught on the bottom after feeding with a Grip Flex pot. They're obviously feeding on the bottom right now, so like I said, decent amount of maggots fed via a pot will allow you to catch these on the deck. At this present point in time, we're feeding with a pole mounted pot and trying to keep the fish on the bottom. So we just hooked this eye on the bottom then, but we're starting to get a few indications of fish shallow. So after netting this one and getting it in the net, I'm going to try and start bringing those fish up. So off comes the pole pot, and let's start feeding with the catapult or out of the hand. I always feed twice when fishing up in the water, and even on the bottom when I'm feeding with the catapult or out of the hand. The first sort of initial splash is enough to attract the fish, and I think the second splash sort of congregates them into an area. So it's sort of like they get alert, they know some food's come in, but it requires a second amount of food going in for them to actually pinpoint where it's gone. And it will definitely catch you more fish by feeding twice. In terms of regularity, I'd be looking to feed every sort of 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the day. There we go, into another ride. Another tip, when you've hooked a fish, is to feed once, just to try and congregate a few fish back. Because when you do hook a fish, inherently some of the fish will spook out of the peg, and just that one little feed can congregate them after you've hooked one and speed up the catch rate. That's the stamp-eyed that we're catching today. About 10-12 ounces. They're brilliant weight builders and brilliant fish to catch. The fourth and final rig is my margin rig. Now, it might look like a bit of a heavy float for fishing in such shallow water, but when fishing for carp, you've got to remember that they're quite big fish and you need a heavy rig to stabilise the bait on the bottom. So we've got an Extreme Free 4x14. We've got a KM4 size 16, 016 mainline, and one bulk which is positioned 5 inches from the hook. Like I said, you're looking to try and nail the hook bait on the bottom down the edge, and a heavy float and bulk helps you to do this. Once again, 018 line, and that's finished off with a Middy pink, which will deal with all the size fish we're expected to encounter in this lake. So now let's look on to feeding down the edge. Now for me, I'm going to fish with pellets. In recent years, it's been very, very popular to feed ground bait down the edge for carp and F1s. And the reason being, ground bait is a very, very attractive bait to put in the swim. It's full of flavour and full of particles and creates a cloud in the swim. However, the problem you get is the more ground bait you put in, the more small particles and the larger the area it spreads over, which actually makes catching the fish very difficult. Although you've got them there, you can't actually catch them sometimes. It can be very frustrating. So what I'm going to fish today is a particle-based mix, i.e. pellets. Something that's whole, will go onto the bottom and get eaten in one lump. And that means I'm not leaving a load of bait down the edge for the other fish to sort of carry on feeding. It's a much cleaner way to catch fish. Although it might initially seem that I've got less there, what's going to happen is I'm going to get more, I'll end up with more fish because I'm catching them cleanly. The same way as what I've described across. You go in with a small amount of bait, very accurately, catch one fish as it comes into the peg, and then you start again next time you drop in. A big load of bait can make it very difficult to catch the fish. So I'm going to start off with a small amount of pellets and see if I can get any bites. Now the only reason I'd have to put in a big pot is if I'm not actually catching over a small amount of bait. Sometimes you need to sort of give the swim a big hit in order to actually attract the fish into the peg. And only in this instance would I actually get the big pot out and start feeding a large amount of bait. It's much better just to keep things nice, clean and tidy with a small amount of bait, fed very accurately, and trying to catch a single fish at a time as they come in and out the swim. So that's the biggest tip for me, is to start cautiously and then increase the feed if you're not getting the response you require. Okay, we just had our first bite down the edge, and that was after feeding 3 times. Come about a minute after I fed, which is about the sort of time scale I'd expect. I'm only feeding a small amount of bait, so it doesn't take long once a fish comes into the peg to mop it up. Not sure what it is. It could be an F1 or it could be a carp. It looks like a carp. It just goes to show that it's best off to start cautious in your swim rather than giving it the big pot right at the start, and just to see what you can catch. And there we have a perfect fish from down the edge. In this episode, we've looked at a typical canal style swim and how to approach it. Bear in mind that on a different swim or an open style venue, these tactics may differ slightly, but the 4 principles will always remain the same. Join us in episode 2, where we'll be looking at the importance of having a balanced pole setup. And remember, master your fishing, master those fish.